Hello, my name is Calvin. I'm from Defund the BBC. Today I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by yet another Spartan, Bridgen MP. He's a Conservative Party politician and businessman. And since May 2010, he has been the Member of Parliament for North West Leicestershire constituency, a prominent figure on the party's right, and is a long-term critic of the European Union and a supporter of Brexit. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. So
it's a pleasure.
In the past, you said that, I think it was in 2019 actually, you said that the BBC are essentially criminalising people for being poor. Now, is this then something which your constituents have raised concerns about? And what are their views on the BBC harassing elderly people during a pandemic?
Well, the fact that it's a criminal offence to not pay for your TV licence is, in my view, a crime in itself. I brought forward to the House of Commons back in, I think, 2014, and I got a majority of the Commons in favour of it, a complete rainbow alliance from Jeremy Corbyn on the left to John Redwood on the right and everything in the middle, George Galloway, the Liberal Democrats, Ming Campbell. They could see the inequity of criminalising people for not paying what was then a £145 TV licence. And the fact that the Magistrates Association, who prosecute people for TV licence evasion, hundreds of thousands of them every year, they've been calling for over 20 years for decriminalisation. I managed to get it into the deregulation bill in 2014 at committee stage, but as history will show, George Osborne then negotiated it away with the BBC in return for the BBC taking on the liability for the over 75s TV licence, which they later reneged on after charter renewal. And I think the huge problem the BBC's got, and I raised it at charter renewal in 2014, was that the TV licence fee funding model was not fit for purpose and certainly not fit for the future. And as I pointed out to the BBC 6-7 years ago, technology will outdate the TV licence and you're going to be left in a terrible position. The problem has always been that the BBC have clung to the licence fee as a lifeboat to save them, when actually it's a lodestone that's dragging them down and has held the whole organisation back.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned there they went back on their word and have now asked the elderly to pay. And around 750,000 pensioners have refused to pay for their TV licence. There's reportedly been a black hole of more than £100 million because of it. So if you were the Director General, where would you start in trying to cut back on this waste?
Well, if I'd have been the Director General, I did actually speak to Tim Davie on a Zoom call. Well, I didn't actually ask a question, but I listened in, and I'm afraid I didn't even bother asking my question. The audience on the Zoom call was packed out with patsies, and it's clear that Tim Davie is living in some sort of echo chamber or surrounded by sycophants, pretending they're in the 1970s, and there's only a few channels, and we've always had competition, and the BBC must carry on. And I'm sure if you're sitting in that BBC new broadcasting house on Regent Street, which is an amazingly £1 billion cost to the licence fee payer building, you can quite honestly believe that you're the centre of the universe and everything revolves around you. But I mean, the sad thing is that fewer and fewer people are watching the BBC. That's a trend that's going to continue. There's far more competition, and that's without GB News starting up in a couple of weeks' time. And it's basically irrelevant, the BBC, to an increasing proportion of our population who object to having to be forced to pay for something they neither want nor consume. I'm afraid that's... And the sad thing about the BBC is they want to talk about their future. For an increasing proportion of our population, the BBC are completely irrelevant, and they actually don't care anymore about the BBC. And I told them in 2014 what they needed to do was merge the BBC with BBC Worldwide. They've got this fantastic back catalogue. They needed to go subscription around the world, which would have had a massive, massive take-up in the English-speaking world. And those people who wish to learn to speak English, they've got the asset of the taxpayer, licence fee payer funded back catalogue, which they could have put on demand for the whole world, they would have been the Netflix or the Amazon Prime striding the globe, and they would have been projecting a huge amount of soft power and influence for this country. They didn't have the guts to do it, and now they're just slowly dying of 1,000 cuts, quite honestly. And what really annoys me is, I mean, there are many BBCs. The BBC you would see in the East Midlands, Derby, Nottingham, Leicester studios. That's really a completely different sort of BBC to the one in London. And yet that's always the one that they try and cut back on immediately. They threaten emotive things like, oh, we'll cut all the children's programmes, and we'll make cuts to. They've made a third of the managers in the regions have lost their jobs, so they're well down on that. And what really annoys me as well is they take this massive chunk of licence fee. About 20% of all the licence fee comes from the Midlands, and the BBC's spend on either their footprint in the Midlands or programmes they make particularly about the Midlands amounts to about 2%. And that again reinforces this impression that my constituents in the Midlands, and my seat is the middle of the Midlands, and there are a lot of seats further from London than my seat, 120 miles from Parliament. They look at what the output is of the BBC, and it's London-centric. It's making programmes for people like the people who are on the BBC, and it's seen as completely out of touch with people's real people's lives in the Midlands and the North, and increasingly irrelevant. And I don't know how they get out of this death spiral, quite honestly. They missed the opportunity in 2014 to go global. They could have been a world player, and now they're going to pay the price for that. And as far as I can see, they're just talking to themselves, and they're in their own bubble still.
100%. As a Midlander myself, I hear you speaking so much common sense right now. They're stuck in this London bubble. But obviously the Raw Charter isn't up for review again until 2027. But there is pressure.
Originally, Calvin, it was said that there was going to be a midterm review, and I think we desperately need a midterm review because the model's broken now, and I don't know what state the BBC is going to be in, and what state appetite for the BBC services, but I don't see it increasing in the next few years. They need to take action now.
Completely agree with you there. I think maybe a Netflix subscription style based model might work. I like what you said about opening it up to a global audience. It's interesting that they've taken that that license fee funded back catalogue and asked us to pay for it again with BritBox.
Well, if I was over 75 and I've been asked to now pay for the BBC licence fee, I would think that considering the amount of repeats on the programme and the back catalogue, I've already paid for it.
100%. So let's talk about the content they're making right now. So last week, the BBC announced a 3-part documentary called Greta Thunberg, A Year to Change the World. Now, this, alongside various other shows that have sought to preach about the supposed climate crisis, is another example. Is this another example, in your eyes, of the BBC using taxpayer money to preach rather than inform?
It does appear to me, and it is clear there's a clear political bias on the BBC. I remember the first time I went on the East Midlands politics show, and the interviewer referred to me as Mr. Bridgen and the Labour candidate by their first name, and it wasn't even subtle. The coverage of the Brexit referendum was appalling, and it's been appalling since. And I think Brexit has been a watershed in many respects, breaking traditional political allegiances, and also the scales dropping from people's eyes over the BBC and other mainstream media reporting from their own angle. And I think, asking the over 75s to dip into their pocket. I mean, if this were a government policy to impoverish the over 75s, the BBC would be leading the charge themselves, saying that we're inhuman and we're going to be pushing pensioners into poverty. I mean, I can almost see them spieling it out now in front of me. And there's no doubt about that. But I mean, the BBC actually are a fantastic propaganda organisation. And one of the people they're best at doing propaganda for is actually themselves, which they're very, very good at. 70% of the public, probably a bit less than that now, still at least look to the BBC for at least some of their news. They have a huge influence over public opinion and setting the narrative. But what people have now got the guts for is they look at it and think, that's not a narrative I want to go along with. And they are preaching at me. And I think, we've got a rather more informed audience than we had in the 1960s and 70s. And they've got much more choice of where they get their news from, and they get a diverse sources of news. And perhaps they see the BBC and some of the other mainstream news platforms for what they are.
Yeah, I think you're right. They're setting the narrative rather than reporting the news. They're trying to make it. They're not representative anymore. You mentioned earlier.
Also, when I see reports that, and I've had it from my own children and people I've spoken to, and when the media then reports that they've done a survey and young people are terrified that the planet's going to burn up. It's almost spreading horrendous disinformation. Human beings are very adaptable, and we can sort things out, as the COVID-19 vaccine has been sorted in record time. I'm absolutely confident that they're terrifying, certainly the younger generation, over things that may or will certainly not be the issue that they're made out to be. And I do remember that when I was a child, the media were telling me that we were heading into another ice age at the time, which was quite interesting.
Well, it's due any minute now, isn't it, apparently? You mentioned the coverage of the pandemic. How do you feel the BBC has done during the pandemic, trying to report the government's daily business? In particular, looking at the vaccine rollout, is the BBC doing enough to champion the efforts and getting behind the spirit of taking the vaccine?
Well, it is the British Broadcasting Corporation. It does tend to take the European Union's line on most things. I think it found itself that it couldn't defend the terrible procurement of vaccine by the EU. There's an element of that's been talked about vaccine nationalism, and there was vaccine nationalism, and it was the EU did not want to have to approve or even use or procure the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine for political reasons. They went with three investing in heavily and pre-purchasing 3 French manufactured vaccines, which all failed. And that's what's left them in a precarious situation where now they're under media spotlight, which they're not really used to. I think the BBC have been forced by the inevitability of events to be a little more fair over the vaccine rollout, which has been a huge government success. It may be through gritted teeth, but I mean, at the end of the day, the numbers speak for themselves, don't they? But it is depressing that it is the British Broadcasting Corporation, and it seems to take the narrative and report as fact whatever foreign governments say, and then always questions statements made by our own government, but it doesn't put foreign governments. And it particularly annoys me that some of the reports from China, I know it's a very controlled environment, but it would appear that they've been quite happy to produce news and report it as fact, which has since been proven to be completely untrue. You'll remember the early in the pandemic, the hospital that was being built in a week in China, which was widely filmed as a paragon of Chinese ingenuity, that they could build a hospital for COVID-19 patients. It would appear that was actually a block of apartments that's 600 miles away, but that was all reported as fact on our media. It's complete disinformation. They really do need to put foreign governments under the same scrutiny that they put our government.
Yeah, it loosens their journalistic integrity, doesn't it? There are alternative solutions, thankfully, cropping up. GB News is set to launch later this year, as you mentioned earlier. Do you think they will be able to give the BBC a run for its money in being the voice for representative Britain? And can they break the London bubble of lobbying reporting?
Well, I think they know what the problems are and the dissatisfaction. Andrew Neil, he may be a conservative, but he is the interviewer that terrified me the most whenever I was interviewed by him, because quite honestly, he's the smartest guy and he does his research, and you've got to be absolutely on the money, and he will bring you into the interview and you think you're doing, and then he's always got the haymaker for you, which I've seen him deliver on many occasions. So being interviewed by anybody, Andrew Neil may lean to the right, but he's certainly not. He's certainly impartial when it comes to interrogating his interviewees. He knows what's wrong with the BBC, and clearly GB News. It's no good them just producing a product that's the same as the BBC or Sky News. There's got to be a differentiator there, and I think there'll be a huge appetite for it. I think, but ultimately they'll be judged by the quality of the news and the programmes they produce. And the reports they produce, and that's the marketplace we're in. But I think they will be inevitably, that's another player in an already crowded market, and it's going to take more viewers away from the BBC. And again, that takes the legitimacy of the TV licence away. And to think that if I want to watch GB News and I want to watch it on live television, I have to pay the BBC. And the analogy has been made many times, and you've heard it yourself. If I want to go to the newsagent and buy a copy of the Telegraph, I don't have to pay for a copy of the Guardian at the same time.
Absolutely spot on. Andrew Bridgen MP, thank you for speaking so much common sense, and thank you for supporting Defund the BBC. It's been a pleasure to have you on today.
All the best. Thank you.